Thanks so much for joining us on our second Dark Skies webinar, part of the Holston Horizons webinar series. We're really excited today to talk about go-to-market strategy. It's a really, really important subject, and it's something that can become quite difficult for a lot of businesses to be able to untangle and navigate quite complex buying procedures from various different buyers from throughout the supply chain, right up to primes and through to space agencies as well. Luckily for us, we do have three people who are absolute experts in those things. So first of all, we've got Lisa Mullen from Space Northeast, and she's going to be helping us talk through some of the examples that she's worked with within her cluster. We've got Kelly, who is the expert in all things European Space Agency tender writing, and she knows a lot around the wraparound of how you should develop your narrative, your go-to-market, market penetration strategies. And then we've got Jess from Holston B2B, who's going to talk about everything else outside of the tender process, how to make brand awareness and those types of things. So if you do have any comments, please use the comment function. If you have any questions, what we're going to do is have a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section, and I will ask the speakers at the end those questions. We'll pose them to them. So throughout the rest of the session, if you do have them, just put them there and we'll have the Q&A at the end. So we're going to kick off with you, please, Lisa. Can you just give us a bit of an intro to yourself, a bit of a background to the Space Northeast cluster? It's, one that's been around for a long time, and you've got some real great strong roots within the industry. And I kick off with the first question on what does credibility actually look like to a business that's new to the space sector? What signals make a buying partner take someone really seriously? So give us an intro and then thoughts initially on that question, please, Lisa.
Great, and thanks for having me on this morning. So I'm Lisa Mullen. I'm Cluster Manager for Space Northeast England. We are one of 15 clusters throughout the UK and one of 11 funded clusters from UK Space Agency. We cover the whole of the Northeast, so spanning from Northumberland all the way down to Tees Valley. Currently have around 81 space companies within our cluster, but our key focus at the moment is looking at that of adjacent sectors and how we can get companies to pivot. Just a quick one on our three key strengths, I would say, would be Earth observation for climate change, resilient communications, including kind of optical communications, and also space domain awareness. So those are the three kind of key themes that we cover in the Northeast. But our cluster is really diverse, covering kind of, we've got small manufacturing companies, and it's looking at those supply chain companies as well. So the first question that you asked, Georgia, around kind of what does credibility look like to a business that's new to the sector? What I would say in my first thoughts would be that it isn't necessarily about having worked in space before, and space is just another sector. It's not all about rocket science. It's kind of about demonstrating that you understand the sector's challenges, the standards and the requirements, and that you can deliver kind of reliably. So what I would say for somebody new, the strongest signals are having a clear understanding of where your capability fits within the space value chain. So having that understanding of kind of where potentially your product or kind of where your service fits within the industry. And it's probably about having kind of successful delivery in adjacent sectors, whether that be in defence, aerospace, manufacturing, telecoms. A prime example of that is one of the companies that sits in Space Northeast England is Filtronic. They were traditionally a telecommunications company, pivoted into space and have kind of major contracts with SpaceX and kind of millions of pounds worth of contracts at the moment. I would also say it's a willingness to engage with the space ecosystem, and it's probably something that we'll talk about kind of moving forward, and learn from established organisations. So looking at kind of businesses that have worked within the sector for kind of decades, and kind of learning from kind of what they have gone through, as well as kind of participating in recognised networks, cluster events and industry events, as well as building those relationships with the stakeholders within that ecosystem. So working with your universities within the Northeast, we've got relationships with all 5 universities. So we work really closely with Durham, Northumbria, Tees Valley, and working with those primes, as well as kind of the SMEs and the public sector. So ultimately, kind of what I would say is kind of buyers and partners want confidence that you can solve a problem and add value, as well as being a trusted collaborator. So that would be my thoughts on that first question.
So yeah, you talk about adding value, and I wonder if you can speak to our audience a little bit about what you guys at Space Northeast do, particularly for either a company who is pivoting from an adjacent industry or who's starting up within the space sector. You know, what is the real added value that a space cluster like Space Northeast or Space Up Yorkshire or any of the other clusters are really supporting them with, particularly in the pivotal first 6 to 12 months versus them trying to navigate this on their own?
What I would say around that is that the space sector can seem quite complex from the outside. So there's numerous stakeholders, even just the funding opportunities. So whether that be from UK Space Agency, whether it be from Innovate, whether it be from ESA, it's a complex. So by kind of working with the cluster, we've got that overview of kind of what's happening, not just in the Northeast, but working with the other kind of clusters within the UK. We know what's happening, what's going on. So by kind of working with a cluster, you can build an established network of kind of industry, academic and government partners. Even if we don't have the answer, we know the person who kind of we can point you in the right direction of. We can kind of facilitate introductions to potential customers, collaborators and supply chain opportunities. We've often got resources. So for example, at the moment, a company within the Northeast RTC are mapping kind of supply chain for the likes of Lockheed Martin. So we can kind of access information as to kind of what that supply chain could look like and where a potential company could fit in. We've often got access to market intelligence and insights into kind of what emerging opportunities they could be. So, for example, upcoming funding opportunities, the likes of SCIF, the Space Cluster Infrastructure Programme, we have kind of an overview as to kind of and help shape what that funding call looks like. So we're working behind the scenes on things that are kind of up and coming. So NSIP, the National Space Innovation Programme, what does that funding opportunity look like? So we've got access to a lot of information that isn't kind of visible within the sector. Also things like access to events. Just a great example for us as kind of Space Northeast England is that we can use some of our budget to put on kind of larger scale collaborative events. So a great example of that was Spacecom, where we had a regional stand, for example, and charged our cluster members kind of a small fee as opposed to what it would have been exhibiting alone. We're doing the same for Bremen in November. And kind of visibility within the region. And I mentioned kind of the national space ecosystem. We meet monthly with other clusters as to kind of what they're working on. Could you collaborate with a kind of another partner at the opposite side of the country? And looking at kind of those collaborative opportunities, another great example is we run a networking event on the last Thursday of every month called Space Cascading Network. And through that network, 2 of our small SMEs within the region, so 2-man bands, both of them come together to bid for a European Space Agency project and have been awarded just under €500,000 for that. And they wouldn't have met if it hadn't been for the cluster. So it's really kind of what we often say, that a cluster helps businesses kind of avoid reinventing the wheel. And you can kind of start full conversations from day one after speaking to us, and we'll always point you in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone went to the conference that Lisa and her team put on. Was it last month, a couple of months ago, in Durham? But yeah, I mean, the importance of really representing the regions and having like a real appreciation for like grassroots businesses within your cluster is so important. You can't, like you say, you can't always have businesses who are in the Northeast go to national and international conferences, but when you're holding something of similar size, scale, value in the region, that's just, you know, I was so impressed with that that I was so impressed with that conference. It's you know, it is cutting edge conversations in the Northeast, and you know, you guys are putting that together. So I think the academic side of it, as well, as you mentioned, just that academic network, it's something that I think that SMEs, even if those have been around for a long time in the region, may not have access to, or just may not have knowledge of the fact that they can work and collaborate with universities. It just may not be something that they ever think about.
Absolutely, and I think sometimes it's hard to understand where an SME, say kind of a one-man band, how did they get access to that university? So kind of how do they get in, how do they make those introductions, and that's what we are here for.
Yeah, it's about, you just don't know what you don't know, because it would just never occur to some people that would be something that would be an avenue of collaboration for them. So the last question that I've got for you then, Lisa, is if you're coming across a business that have found you and have realised that there's a potential value there, what's a practical first step that you would recommend for a business who knows they want to get into space but they just don't know where to start?
Yeah, I think kind of the first step is to stop thinking about getting into space. I think it's starting to think about, what have you got that could solve a problem? So what do you have in terms of a product? How can kind of that be realigned to the space sector? So many companies underestimate how relevant kind of their existing expertise already is. So whether it's in advanced manufacturing, cyber, data, communications, it's really about how can they apply that to the space sector. So my advice would be to identify kind of your core capability and where it could add value to the space market. And then kind of the best piece of advice that I could offer is engage with your local cluster, such as Space Northeast England. So if you go onto the Satellite Applications Catapult website, there's a cluster map on there that shows you who kind of your local cluster would be, and start having conversations about potential routes into the sector. So those would be kind of the two kind of main pieces of advice. But again, attend industry events and start building those relationships, because it's about kind of people in the sector that have got that knowledge, and look for collaborative projects. So it may be that you do have a competitor within kind of the same industry. Look at how you could collaborate to gain kind of experience and visibility, and focus on solving real kind of challenges rather than trying to become a kind of a space company overnight. So it's usually the businesses that are most successful are those that bring an existing strength into the sector and apply it to a new market, rather than trying to kind of reinvent themselves as a company. The space sector needs more than kind of, I think a lot of people, when you speak to them, and this was kind of evident when we did the Northeast Space Conference, the afternoon before we had an event where we brought 100 college students in, and looking at the kind of variety of the range of careers within the industry. So it's not just about rocket scientists, it's manufacturers, software developers, data specialists, engineers. So the role of Space Northeast England is to help organisations understand where they fit, connect them with the right people, and accelerate their journey into kind of a highly collaborative sector. That would be kind of how I would frame that.
Thanks. I mean, loads and loads of advice there. It is an absolute treasure trove of resources, as are a lot of the clusters. So, as Lisa mentioned there, obviously industry events we do have the Space Cascade event at the end of this month in Durham. I wonder if one of my team can maybe put a link to that in the discussion here, so that anyone can have a look at that event as well. I also have the privilege of coming to speak at that event and talk about some of the marketing stuff that we're doing at Holston B2B, so excited for that. Thanks. If anyone has any questions for Lisa, please do put them in the Q&A. Or if you have any comments, the chat function is there. It's open for everyone and anyone to use if you've got any thoughts or questions. So getting companies into space is exactly what Kelly has been doing, our second speaker, for I don't know how long. You're going to have to give us a bit of an intro to yourself, actually, Kelly. I don't want to do you disjustice. So if you can give us a bit of an intro to yourself, and I'll pose the first question again there as well. Obviously, you're working as a bid support for ESA, MOD, things like that. Can you tell us what the biggest misconception is about how that process works? Give us an intro and jump straight into that. Thanks,
sure.
Kelly.
So thank you very much for having me on the panel. My name's Kelly Instrell and I run KI Bid Consulting, which is a bid consultancy helping businesses to navigate the world of European Space Agency bidding and other institutional bidding. My background is bidding, so I spent over 10 years at Thales Alenia Space, latterly as head of bid management, and my background is predominantly bidding for European Space Agency contracts, but not exclusively. I started KI Bid Consulting a year ago, and I'm delighted to be here today. So for your first question, I think it is very important for people to understand that when you're talking about institutional bidding, so bidding for European Space Agency contracts or MOD contracts or UK Space Agency contracts, that kind of thing, it's typically a very prescriptive bid process. So if we take the ESA bidding process as an example, it is highly prescriptive. And it is also incredibly detailed. One thing to note is that the ESA technical officers, so the people on the ESA side who understand the technology, who are looking for the solution to it, and then who write part of the tender, the statement of work for the tender, are incredibly knowledgeable in that subject area. So when you're bidding into ESA, it's really a case of being credible, providing enough detail technically, but also programmatically to show that you have a solution that will work. It's not a case of just providing some brochures and a sort of vague idea of what it might be. For ESA bidding, it really is that detail. So yes, it's important to note that ESA really is an intelligent customer from that perspective. It's also really important, I think, to note how long it takes really to do a proper ESA bid. It is, even if it's quite a low value bid or medium value bid, it still takes a relatively large amount of time to get everything prepared as it needs to be. The normal ESA bid timeframe is about 6 weeks from release of the invitation to tender to the point of submission. But if you have suppliers, possibly your offer consists of things that you're procuring through your supply chain, you need to engage with them. They need to provide their offer to you. They need to provide the content that you will be including in your ESA bid. That all takes time. So I think one of the things that's really important is to start early, to look at the things that are coming up in the pipeline and really try and focus on the key opportunities that are coming up. Get your consortium, so your supply chain, agreed beforehand, work out what you're going to offer, and then be prepared for the point at which the ITT actually comes out. For ESA bids, well, and for other types of bid also, the evaluation criteria are also really important. So that is what is being scored. So it's really about answering the question and giving the reviewers opportunity to award you marks, rather than answering something else that you think they might want to see, rather than the things that they're actually asking. I think for MOD bids, it's a very, very similar story. One thing I've noted with MOD bids, you often find that there are almost two customers. You've got the end user, in whichever part of MOD the end user would be sitting, could be Space Command or one of the forces, and then you've got the procurement route through the MOD. So it could be through the NAD, the National Armaments Group, it could be previously through DENS and those sort of organisations, and it's sort of managing both of those, so the procurement route and what's required for the bid, and then the requirements and interaction with the end customer as well. That's an overview of the first question.
Yeah, and I think that as people can tell from just how intricate the situation is, that someone like Kelly is absolutely integral to the process. Sorry, there's a printer just printing out behind me. I don't know if you can hear that. It's quite loud. So what we've talked about quite a lot here is credibility, and I think credibility is really important, but I think that we don't want to put people off to say you have to have worked in space before, you have to have loads of logos on your website, you have to have loads of case studies. The credibility, as you say, Kelly, comes more into the fit for purpose, making sure it's fit for purpose, and making sure, like you say, that you've got that supply chain as well. So the second question that I wanted to pose was, how should a company think about bid readiness? And is there a point where you can tell someone isn't ready yet, and what needs to change? So in your experience, what sort of a red flag where you're like, these guys aren't ready?
I think in order to be bid ready, it's all about the pre-work. If an ITT comes out and that's the first time you've seen it and you think, oh, we're going to bid for this, and then suddenly that becomes your must win and all that sort of thing, I think at that point it's probably too late. It's about that engagement before the point that the ITT comes out. And in terms of bid readiness, I'm thinking of the sort of questions that would be asked at a bid no bid review within a company. So it's things like understanding what it is that the customer wants, and not just what's written in the ITT, but understanding why they want it. Have they had previous iterations of this? Why are they asking this question? What is their long-term gain? And working out how this ITT fits into the context of what the customer is actually after. It's also about understanding the competitors. So who else might be bidding for this? What might they be offering? And then looking at your solution. And often companies think about their solution as purely the technical side, in terms of the engineering, and this is what our product or service is going to look like. But the solution's broader than that. It's important to also consider the schedule. That might be a key driver for the customer. Looking at the pricing, looking at your commercial positioning, your supply chain, anything that's going to give you a competitive advantage. So understanding what it is that you're offering and how that compares to the question that the customer is asking, the problem that they are trying to solve, and how that compares to what other people might be bidding. But it's also looking internally whether you have the capacity in terms of your own bid resources to deliver that bid. Like I said at the very beginning, institutional bids are a lot of work. There's no getting away from it. They're great when you win them, but they are a lot of work. So you need to make sure that you have the bid team in place that can dedicate the time to doing a proper job on that bid. And then equally, if you win that work, have you got the resources in place that can deliver that project? That's important as well, especially around ESA bids. They will often require you to submit CVs for your key people. So having that team in place and being able to demonstrate that if you win the work, you've got these individuals ready to go is very important. And a slightly different point, but particularly around ESA bidding, your company needs to be ready to accept the terms and conditions on which the ESA ITT is tendered. It's not a case of being able to negotiate those. They are as they are. They've been agreed by the 23 member states of ESA, and it's one of those things. Doing business with ESA means that you accept the majority of the terms and conditions. So having a review of those ahead of time with your legal department is also important, so you don't get to the submission point and then suddenly there's some issues that can't be moved on. So I think in terms of bid readiness, it's trying to look at all of that ahead of time, particularly around the solution piece. If you have a consortium and you need to procure expertise or products from elsewhere from a supply chain, it's having that engagement beforehand. Start discussions, start thinking about work share, what could other companies provide, and start those discussions way in advance of the ITT coming out. I'm just looking at my notes to see if there's anything else I was going to mention. No, I think that's it for question 2. I've got some more points in my next question.
Super comprehensive, Kelly, and I know that it's so hard for you to be able to dilute just 10 years of experience into this sort of little webinar. But I do appreciate all the advice that you're giving as well. Sorry, it wasn't on the original questions, but I just wondered, if a company has a bid team or they just have one person, or to what extent can you come come in and support? You know, if they've got a huge bid team, would it just be, you would just be there for sort of strategic overview? If they just have one person, it's not even 100% a job, is it something that you can come in and be a little bit more hands-on with that service?
Yeah, absolutely. So the sort of engagements I've helped with, I used to run something called the ESA Proposal Advice Service through the UK Space Agency, and that was very much reviewing bids at the end of the process. That ran as a pilot programme. And that was reviewing bids as they came to the end of that process before they were submitted to ESA. So that was very much at the end of the process, as you know, trying to pick up common mistakes, looking at consistency and that sort of thing. But I also work with businesses much earlier in the process, looking at bid strategy, looking at how their bid's going to be set up, looking at their supply chain, and then any degree of sort of bid management, coaching, working with them to try and upskill as they go through that bid process, regular reviews, even deep dives into things like looking at creating a WBS, looking at schedules in detail, looking at the bid deliverables or whatever it might be, to make sure that the company is upskilled, is learning from my experience, but you know, is also sort of helping them trying to secure that funding that they're going for.
So I did have a third official question for Kelly, and it was around what's something that businesses need to do and usually don't do to build their awareness more holistically outside of specifically writing that bid.
Yeah, I think this sort of touches on what Lisa was saying. I think there's an awful lot of work that can be done around the sort of capture approach or business development, so that activity pre the ITT release. So I think engaging with the local clusters, so we heard from the Northeast cluster already, but also whichever region you're in, engaging with your local cluster is really important, to be put in touch with other companies in that area, for them to know you, to be on their radar, but also engaging with the UK Space Agency teams. So if you've identified an ESA opportunity, say in GSTP funding or around ARTES funding or NAV funding, that you engage with development programme teams within the UK Space Agency to get to know them, get to know what their roadmap looks like, get to know what their priorities are. Because it's worth noting that there are a lot of tenders visible on the ESA tendering platform, which is called ESA Star, but not all of those are subscribed by the UK. So it's important to have that overlay of which ones the UK is supporting. From an ESA perspective, if you're interested in potential ESA work, it's worth registering on the ESA Star website, and that gives you access to this list of intended invitations to tender, intended ITTs that are coming up. You can also access that list if you don't want to register on the platform through the UK Space Agency ESA team. They send out a monthly distribution list of a download of the invitations to tender that are coming up, along with other information. There are various industry days around ESA that you can sign up to and go to. Notably, there's one coming up in September at ESTEC in the Netherlands, which is an SME event. And many organisations from across Europe go there and meet ESA, meet each other. It's a very sought after event. There's various supplier events, industry days and things like that going on that are advertised through ESA Star. So I would say it's definitely worth registering on ESA Star if you're new to this sector and looking at potentially working with ESA. Also, there are a couple of events, there were some recently, I'm not quite sure when the next ones will be, workshops hosted by the UK Space Agency on doing business with ESA. They're called ESA 101s. And they are worth going to if this is potentially interesting to you. And also ESA bid writing workshops. There was one in March in Bristol. There might be another one at some point. I'm not quite sure what the agenda is for that. They are hosted by ESA and very detailed about how to write a bid and what they're looking for and their tender evaluation process and that kind of thing. In terms of pivoting into space or even taking space technology out into other sectors, there's the ESA Technology Brokers, which in the UK is a company called TWI, and also the BAS ambassadors, and their role is very much to work with companies looking at the technology and looking at how that can be applied to other sectors. So perhaps we can put, if we send out anything after this, we can provide details for those organisations. If you have something in an adjacent industry and are looking to come into space, or have something in space that you're looking to pivot into another industry, they would be a good port of call for discussion. In terms of non-ESA stuff, I would say signing up to the various newsletters is a good idea. So for example, UKDI, if you're on the looking at defence opportunities, they then tend to send out funding opportunities that are coming up. Trade organisations like UK Space and ADS are also worth joining, and they have various subcommittees, for example, SME committees and so forth, that you can join, get to know organisations in that realm, and also as a forum for discussion and that kind of thing. There's various grants. The SCIF grant was mentioned, and the NSIP grant through Space Agency. There are others, but those are some of the ones coming up, as well as things like Horizon opportunities, grants through UKRI. Innovate UK have a whole bunch of opportunities. So there's so much out there in terms of potential funding and where to look, that it's certainly worth not just focusing on the things that have space in the title, looking broader than that, because there are a lot of opportunities that could be relevant to space companies that just aren't called space opportunities. And then a couple of other points. Accelerators might be a suitable thing if you're at that stage of growth in your business. There are accelerator programs run by the UK Space Agency. There's an ESA one, an ESA Business Incubation one called ESA BIC. Innovate UK run one called iCure. So, and there are others. There's the NATO Diana program, and through Seraphim, one of the VC funds, there's also an accelerator program through that. So it might be worth looking at accelerators to, again, get into that world of what the space startups, liaising with other space startups and getting that support to grow. And then, of course, engaging with potential suppliers and potential customers at events or meeting, wherever, to see what opportunities might come up, potentially around collaboration, or somebody might need some role on a bid that they can't fulfill that you might have the technology or the service for. So it's being in that loop. And then finally, I was going to say, I can make these available to the people on the call. I've written a guide on bidding into ESA. It's called The Essential Guide for Bidding into ESA, catchy title. So we can make that available to people if they are looking to bid for ESA contracts. It's quite a comprehensive guide that goes through how ESA structured the ESA procurement process and then how to write your bid. And another one on demystifying the funding landscape for space in the UK, which talks about the various different funding lines that exist for space, both ones that are termed space and then all of the other ones I mentioned, around Innovate UK and UKRI and MOD and so forth, and how to navigate that a little bit better. So I can certainly make those available to people to help navigate this landscape.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge amount of resources, Kelly, and for everyone on this webinar and who's watching back as well, we are going to have, as always, a full write-up on the Holston B2B website with the video that you can watch back and the full list of all the resources that have been mentioned. Kelly did mention the monthly distribution list that gets sent out by ESA and UK Space Agency each month. What we do at Holston B2B is make that a little bit more easy to use. Sometimes it can be quite unwielding having that huge spreadsheet. So what we've built, I've just posted a link here, is the ESA Tender Watch. That's completely free to use. Anyone can go onto that at any time. It's updated monthly when those emails come out. And you can sign up to that database as well, so that you can get monthly updates as to when that's being updated as well. Kelly, thanks so much. There's a couple of comments here I think that we'll come back to at the end. But yeah, like I say, Kelly, she's just a great person to know, a great person to have as part of your team, and just the knowledge of that holistic piece around awareness and being really part of the sector and understanding the landscape before you even try and put pen to paper when it comes to a bid. So I'm going to move on to
you're on mute, Georgia.
Sorry, where did I get to?
I think you just said my name.
Just like, over to you. Yeah, sorry. I do actually have to ask you some questions, Jess. I'm not going to leave you to just
just talk.
So yeah, Jess runs the communications here at Holston B2B, and she knows a lot about go-to-market strategies, particularly and specifically technical, scientific markets. So building on everything that we've learned previously from the last two speakers, specifically around things around credibility, Jess. When a business is pivoting into space tech, we've talked about adjacent sectors. What typically typically has to change first in terms of things like narrative. You know, is it their story? Is it their targeting? Is it things like proof points, pain points? You know, what's the first step in terms of like brand positioning that you would recommend a business looks at for? We don't say we enter in the space sector, as Lisa's mentioned. We say that we are answering a question, or we're coming up with a solution to a problem. What's the first thing that a company should do?
So I think, first of all, it depends how much space will be of your target audience. So if you've operated in a different market before, and that still remains probably a revenue stream for you and like a audience that you still want to target, then your business and predominantly your website, because that's where your core information, where your story would be or your brand would be, it needs to represent who you want to target and why, and kind of represent each one. So that's why you find quite a lot of businesses have sector pages and stuff like that, because they want to make it clear that they work within these different areas. So it might be starting off with sort of introducing elements like that. But more than anything, I think Lisa mentioned this earlier, is your story doesn't have to change, because the story is how your business has got there, what it's done, and even if it is in a completely different sector, how you got to be and how you've grown as a business is still a relevant story. It doesn't matter that it wasn't all within space. But how you're going to add value to the space sector is like the biggest point that needs to be pushed across. So it's all about it's not about the technicalities. So obviously there's a lot of in-depth technology and stuff like that, and that definitely needs to appear in your bids. It needs to go into detail somewhere on your website. It just probably wouldn't be the first thing you see is an kind of educational draft of what your technology is, how it works and stuff like that. That shouldn't be the first. It'd be more about how you add value, what challenges you're looking to solve. So it's more about making that front and center, but having the evidence and credibility stored somewhere on your website. And I think in terms of targeting, I think you're maybe moving from an industry that had quite a lot of different prospects, maybe a larger audience base, to maybe something that's a bit smaller, dependent on where you are on the supply chain. And obviously a lot of it is related to bidding, and you might be the person bidding, or you might be somebody below on the supply chain on that as well. So it's not necessarily an inbound focused marketing approach. So a lot of other sectors, you're working on trying to get people to your website, trying to get people to fill in forms and stuff like that, whereas this industry doesn't really operate that way. It's like the others has mentioned, it's a lot more relationship based, it's a lot more network based, it's who you know, it's going to events, it's being, you know, in the press, being front of mind for everyone, and being kind of on these bids and stuff like that. So it kind of flips a little bit, where it's more like your website, rather than like an inbound function, it probably has more of a function of building credibility and having all the evidence and what you need hosted there, and the kind of base there, rather than the other way around.
Yeah, so you talked about revenue streams, and I guess you'll have had to already done the piece of research to ensure that this is the correct market for you to be going into. But we do a lot of sort of market planning at Holston B2B. I know that you and your team do a lot of work on things like competitor analysis, looking at that competitive landscape, making sure that, like Lisa said, you're not reinventing the wheel, you're not coming in and offering something that's already quite available already in the market, and you just in your within the bubble of your own business think, you know, this is a great offering, but actually it's something that's already out there. So what is the value and kind of the process of going through that competitor analysis for a business that's really, you know, set on the pivot into any industry, not necessarily just space, but into a new industry land?
Yeah, so there's lots of information out there, and there'll be actually a lot provided by like the UK Space Agency and stuff like that. There's so many reports, documents, and that will give you a top level overview of like the level of funding, the level of growth, the saturation, who's operating in it with it already. And I know a lot of people say, oh, we don't, is it something that always happens in fact finding sessions? It's like, we don't have a competitor. Well, you do. There's somebody operating in it right now. So I think people see competitors as somebody who's doing the exact same thing or has a the exact same technology and can do the same thing. And that's not necessarily the case. Your competitor could be like an incumbent system that you're looking to kind of outperform. It might be an old way of doing things and you have offered a new way and stuff like that. So your competitors don't exactly have to be providing the exact same technology, and you don't want that anyway. So that's a good place to be. So what we do in terms of like competitors, we look at the landscape, look who's in the industry, and then pin out maybe 4 or 5 key competitors. They can even be competitors in the sense of they appear on Google for similar search terms and stuff. So you can have SEO competitors who might not have the same technology, but they still solve a similar challenge or operate in a similar space. So that can also come into it. Pick out those and start looking into their business, what they're doing, what their technology does, and start to differentiate in each of those, like where are your USPs against these businesses. So like Kelly was mentioning on the bid, you have to give a competitive advantage all the time. So always trying to look at these businesses, make matrices of like, what are the USPs against these businesses that they can't do that we can do. There's loads of tools that you can see. If you want to know their website performance, there's lots of snoopy tools that to see how many people are going to their website, how they're finding them, where they're coming from, stuff like that. But also what events are they attending, knowing what networks they're a part of, because any opportunity, any place where they are that you aren't, that's an opportunity that could be lost to them. So just making sure you kind of know where everyone's operating and kind of where they are. Just investigating that piece and then reviewing against them and kind of seeing where you sit amongst those competitors. It'd be a starting point.
Okay, great. And finally, and I know, people don't know what they don't know, and they're not everyone is a marketing expert or a communications expert, and that's why you have to speak to people who are. But what's the biggest red flag that you see early on that tells you that a go-to-market story isn't necessarily going to land with new buyers? And then, as a strategist, what is a way to turn that red flag green?
So I think a red flag and a go-to-market story. So a go-to-market strategy is very different to a go-to-market story. Story is obviously all about like how you position yourself and stuff. So in the back end, you need all the technical information, the detail, the evidence, the certifications, accreditations, all of that good stuff. But that doesn't necessarily be a part of the story. The story is just a value-led proposition about what you're bringing to the market. So I think quite a lot of companies, particularly in the tech space, because it's usually built by very technical, very intelligent people, they want to tell everyone all there is about the technology and as much detail as possible, but actually paring that back a little bit for the go-to-market story and the routes that they're going. So it's a lot more people focus. So like putting your team members and the directors, whoever it may be, a lot more front and center of the business, because I know we think it's all about the technology, which it is, and it definitely is an element that your technology has to work for its purposes, but actually it is a relationship industry. So you need to kind of make those expertise in your team kind of well known in the industry. So thinking like things like the events, speaking slots, stuff like that, press releases, and having those people out at those networks and those events as well, because it is more about the people. It is a relationship industry. It's massively focused on that. So actually less front and center about the tech and all the detail and descriptions of that, and more about the people, the expertise and the value that you're adding. Put that front of center first, and then all the rest is the evidence behind it, that you have to have on your website. You need to prove that usually, but kind of switch it the other way around.
I'm just going to ask Lisa and Kelly, do you guys agree with this? Is this the kind of advice that you're giving? And would you add anything else to what we've already talked about in terms of the more holistic awareness and marketing piece?
If I may, that point really resonates with me, what Jessica was saying about the technical detail. I've reviewed a lot of bids, and often it is overwhelmingly technical, and whilst it is a very technical industry and it needs to be credible, sometimes the rest of it is lost, and it is almost too technical, and things like the programmatics and the how you're going to deliver it and the people gets a little bit drowned out by the overwhelming technical side of it. So there is a skill to writing, and sometimes, you know, that if it is overwhelmingly technical, it doesn't necessarily answer the question as well as it could. Wind themes don't come out as they should, and that sort of thing. So, you know, it is important to be technical, and I know people want to showcase everything that they've done, but it's about being relevant to that specific question that's being asked. So that point certainly resonates with me from all the bids that I've reviewed.
And I would agree with that as well. So within this sector, sometimes we've got highly specialised, highly kind of academics, but that technical sometimes goes over people's heads. So it's really about having that kind of general understanding, and sometimes kind of academics that are working in the sector, kind of it's understanding how to run a business. So they're highly specialised in that field, but kind of what about the business element as well? But just kind of shout out to the clusters as well. We've got support around kind of general kind of business support. I'm employed by Durham County Council and the regeneration team, so we can put you in touch with kind of specialists within kind of business support, as well as kind of the sector knowledge that we've got within space.
Yeah, I mean, we do come across that a lot. And Jess mentioned, I mean, you've all mentioned the value that academics can bring, but it's not necessarily always the language that you need to speak. It's great to have an understanding of the technology and of the research, but then you do need business heads to understand how to really do that market penetration strategy. But then you also need communication specialists who can tell a compelling story. There can be some kind of element of inspiration around why you're there and the people behind it. And I bet, Kelly, if you've got a CV that's very informative but not very inspiring, and as part of your bid, maybe you'd be better off with having a bit more of a story. Like Jess says, something that we do quite often is take leaders from businesses and create personas within the industry of them through things like the attending events or the industry PR thought pieces and awards and all that kind of stuff as well, to make a bit of a face to the business that people can really relate to, because again, it's people who are going to be reading bids. It's not, there might be an element of AI, we don't know now, there might be AIs reading the bids that come through, but there's always going to be a human element to it. And I think that if you can be as inspirational as possible with the leaders and tell their story of businesses, you'll know that you'll always have more trust in those people, that they can they'll do a good job and fulfill the tenders that they've written.
There's one other point, I just thought of it as you were talking. Yeah. Whilst ESA bids, for example, are incredibly technical and you need to go into an awful lot of technical detail, other types of bids, so for example, the NSIP grant that's coming up, is a completely different type of bid. So the focus there is much more on the strategic alignment to the goals of the space agency, for example, and how the investment that you might get for that grant would be catalyzed into further investment for your company. So the focus for something like an NSIP or a SCIF grant or some of the other opportunities like that are much more around the business case and how you're going to commercialize your opportunity and generate more revenue into the UK, thus, enhancing the taxpayer funding that you get initially. So the focus there really isn't on the technical. It is much more on the business case, on the commercialization, on where it's going after. So it's worth bearing that in mind.
Yeah, for sure. And again, Kelly, you've got so much more insight, and we will definitely post all of the links to all of the things that you've talked about. So we've not had any specific questions. Simon, thanks so much for all of your comments. I think that maybe we met at the Space Northeast conference. I think that maybe you were one of the panelists then, and you did have a little bit of a mention here around the fact that you were one of the small companies that Lisa was talking about, and that you had no idea how to create an ESA bid. And the things that you struggled with are how much detail to put in. Everything you state in the final proposal becomes part of the contract. Also, how detailed and time-consuming the project can be. So you've talked a little bit, Kelly, about how time-consuming it can be, and to have a real appreciation and a genuine timeline of how much effort you're going to have to put into it. But I guess that point around the fact that you're not sure how much detail to go into it, and also the fact that does that proposal then become contract? Or is there a bit of sort of negotiation between to say, okay, well, you said you were going to do this, but actually we've picked you for other reasons, and maybe it can change between actually going live with the project? Or is the proposal that you send in when you win the bid set in stone?
No, there's a negotiation phase with ESA. So your proposal is what you submit, it's then negotiated, and then you arrive at a position ready for contract award.
Okay, good. That's, I think, hopefully a bit of a breath of fresh air for everyone who's a little bit concerned about saying every single thing within their proposal, and concerned that that's then going to go into contract straight into writing. Since there's not any other questions, Jess, I wanted to come back to you. Now, Jess and I and Lisa, and she can talk a little bit more about that in the next 5 minutes or so, are all going to Farnborough Air Show next week. So we've talked a lot, everyone on this webinar has talked a lot about the importance of having that network, understanding people within the industry, making sure that you are building up your own network of people around you, and this is one of the events that I think, you know, is super important for that purpose. Jess, on the fly, I know that you've not prepared for this, but you should have a good answer for this. What do you think are some of the top tips that you would give in terms of creating a strategy for going to an event, whether you're a delegate or you have an exhibition stand? What, you know, if someone's thinking, right, I'm going to Farnborough next week, oh, my head's a bit wild, there's a million people that I need to speak to, how can someone be a bit more strategic about really squeezing as much as possible out of an event like that?
Yeah, so this in terms of being a delegate, I think one of the big things is understanding who's attending and who you need to speak to. So it depends how many days you're going to be there, but obviously you've paid for tickets, you want to get some value out of the tickets and make sure you get some strong leads back from it. So I think pinning down, so on their website they have all the exhibitors, who's attending, and stuff like that. So what we tend to go, we do ourselves as well before we attend an event, we go through everyone who's attending and start picking out. There's a lot at Farnborough, so you might need some assistance by an AI tool of some sort, because there is over 1,000 companies listed as exhibitors. But what you can do is pin out those top companies, so you'll know who you're wanting to target and stuff like that, what size of business, all of that, and you can kind of pin out maybe top 20 companies that you would like to speak to and kind of strategically go and speak to those businesses. We do tend to take things like QR codes and stuff like that with us, so that could be literally sometimes even just on your phone, that you can get people to scan. Obviously I don't know if they have a system in place, some exhibition conferences do, but allows you to collate as much information and data from those people so you can have those contacts, and then having a bit of a plan for afterwards of how you're going to follow up, what information you're going to send them and stuff like that is just really helpful. It just makes you, rather than like the first day spent kind of circling the stands trying to figure out where everyone is and who you want to speak to, it kind of allows you to just go in with a bit more of a focus. I think if you're exhibiting, obviously you've paid even more to be there, so you do want to get some value, whatever that value may be. But we do try to have things on the stand, obviously, like your literature and stuff like that. We do tend to, again, QR those so we can track. It's more to do with the tracking than anything else. So you can see how many people came to your website afterwards, how many filled in forms, and then you can create like nurture flows, select the best people of who to pass on to your sales team, and then who to maybe just put in a nurture flow to just keep in front of mind. But we also try and think of other ways to get data from people. So contact information, because obviously not everyone's in like an intent to buy today or sales. It might just be networking and stuff. Random things that lets people will give up their email address for include biscuits. So there's a company called The Biscuery that we take to events with us sometimes, and essentially they live print photos onto biscuits in front of you. So you send them a photo and they'll live print a biscuit for you. A lot of people will give up their email address for a live printed photo biscuit of their dog. So little things like that, like little different things that you can have on your stand. You'll be surprised, there's usually a queue for the biscuit stand. It's a way to kind of draw people in, something a bit interesting. There's lots of different ways you can do things, engagement things, because there's a lot of stand with a lot of similar stuff. So something that could maybe differentiate you and the reason that people want to come stop by your stand is something that's just quite fun, but also does work as well. And it's something that allows you to get like a good pool of leads, because your sales team will probably be stood next to the biscuit stand. But there's lots of things, but we always have a bit of a during, post event plan before we go. Everyone's kind of aligned to it, and then we track sort of how those leads go, what was the outcome, the kind of all of that, so we know if we've kind of got the return on investment of going and spending time at an event, really. But that's top of mind.
So we're going as delegates to Farnborough Air Show next week. We actually have a landing page that we've created on the Wholesome B2B website where we're giving away free competitor analysis, which is super important of everything that we've talked about, navigating that competitive landscape. I'm going to put the link here as well, so that you would actually be allowed to go ahead and get that offer before Farnborough. If anyone does want to fill that in, we can offer it to you guys as well, as something that we're going to go as a point of difference as delegates and have something to talk around. So if you wanted to do something similar, get in touch with us. Lisa, did you want to talk finally in the last couple of minutes about what you guys are going to be doing at the show next week as well?
Yeah, can do. So we've been invited by Lockheed Martin to be part of their pavilion, obviously with their increasing presence in the Northeast. And we should hopefully have some kind of announcement in the coming days, weeks, with regards to the big military contract, which Lockheed are in for. And people have probably seen in the press, if they are successful with that contract, they will be building a satellite manufacturing facility in County Durham. So we've all got our fingers crossed for that. So we'll be alongside Lockheed Martin and Northumbria University Nest on that stand. So some of the things that I'm doing while I'm there is we've got an increasing relationship with Space Florida. So catching up with the guys from Space Florida and the new Consulate General, as the current one will be leaving in August. So looking at developing that relationship. There's a huge US delegation coming over. So I've got meetings with Space North, which is Space Up Yorkshire and Northwest Space Cluster, with the Mississippi delegation, and also catching up with an Indian delegation as well, with regards to the free trade agreement between India, and looking at how we can work with India moving forward within our space cluster and look at collaborations there. We've also been invited to attend the Ambassador's Residence for Belgium. So Faye and I will be going there on the Tuesday night, and Lockheed Martin have a drinks reception on the Wednesday, 3 till 5 on stand 4110, for people to come along to that. So that's kind of some of our plans, but really just getting some leads, kind of part of our role as well as looking at inward investment opportunities and looking at how we can attract people to the Northeast. So that's another thing that we'll be looking into as well.
So I was going to say go and see Lisa and her team, but it sounds like she's absolutely jam-packed already with her schedule. But I'm sure there's the time for you to sneak some fresh conversations in next week as well, Lisa. I know that me and Jess are going to be coming over to say hello for sure. Kelly, thanks so much for answering some questions around the ESA tendering piece as well. The tender watch that we created at Wholesome B2B, it's literally just an easier way to navigate finding things that would be relevant. But as Kelly has pointed out in the chat here, to actually look at the tenders in more detail, you do need to have an ESA registration, but there is a light version which I've gone through myself, which is actually super easy to do. It's definitely worth taking some time to do that. Finally, if anyone else in the audience, or if you know anyone who wants to feature on a Dark Skies webinar, if you want to talk to us about something in particular, if you have any ideas in terms of themes that you would like us to cover in our webinars, we've got them going out between now and the end of the year. If there's any themes that are particularly pertinent that you would like us to find out a bit more information, create a webinar around, we're more than happy to have conversations with people. But as we are running out of time and we are just before lunch, I want to say a massive thank you to Lisa, Kelly and Jess for joining me today, and to everyone else who's joined us and contribute to the conversation as well. Conversations will go on throughout the rest of the year around Dark Skies, and we're happy for anyone to get in touch with us with any kind of questions around things like go-to-market strategy, because we absolutely live for this kind of thing. It's very exciting for us to be working with companies who are changing the face of space and space tech industries. So thanks, I'll leave it there, guys, and we'll speak to you all very soon.